It looks like it is. Welcome everybody to the Oregon Energy Code Stakeholder Panel session, December 13th, and we'll kick it off here in just a moment. Just wanted to remind you that the meeting's being recorded and that we seek all of your input, and we'd like to hear from just everybody that's on at certain times. I'll go ahead and switch over to the main screen here and show you the agenda. It's a lengthy agenda this time. We have several topics, and which will slice up the meeting quite a bit. If we could just wait for questions and answers after each topic that you see here, after commercial adoption, ASHRAE training, those sort of things, then we can get to those questions and answers at that point in time. At the end, I'll do a quick wrap up and talk about that date, March 14th, what we how everybody feels about that date. It looks like it's good on this end. So let's get started. And with that, I want to kick it off over to Mark Heiser from Building Codes Division. He'll be talking about commercial code adoption. Take it away, Mark.
Okay, let's forward to the next slide. Just a quick note for everyone. The status of the Commercial Energy Code Adoption Rule. It's been through the board, and the rulemaking hearing is upcoming on December 20th at 9:30 a.m. Some of the key elements, like to review sort of what the division has been had promised for some time, is that the way the adoption will happen is as soon as the latest ASHRAE 90.1 becomes available, within 180 days of publication. Of course, you have to worry about scheduling of the Energy Board to give them notice, but to begin the process of reviewing the latest 90.1 will happen within 180 days of the publication of the latest 90.1. And then the intent is that within 90 days of the U.S. Department of Energy issuing their final determination, or no later than 1 year after the publication date of the most recent 90.1, BCD will be presenting the latest 90.1 version, of course, modified using the Oregon Energy Efficiency Specialty Code document, to the Construction Industry Energy Board for adoption. Again, we like to make sure that if we go to the next 90.1, that ComCheck will be available. For 90.1 2022, we've already had a discussion with the folks at Department of Energy, PNNL, who take care of the software, and it looks like they'll be more than ready in the coming year. Excuse me, had to clear my throat. And so potentially it could be available, sometime early if 90.1 is released. We've been promised, at least the ASHRAE staff have been saying, it's hopefully coming out before the end of this year, that something could potentially happen by early to middle of 2024, actually, for the use of 90.1. Again, this will be a little bit before the publication of the IECC 2024. Currently, for the coming year, the Construction Industry Energy Board dates are scheduled for sometime in February, June 13th and October 17th. Thanks, Roger. I'm sorry.
Yeah. All right, so the next slide is about ASHRAE training. Take it away, Mark.
Okay. There is a What's New presentation coming from ASHRAE and the Department of Energy to sort of go over what is coming, and sort of would want to give people a heads up. Look for this. You may want to attend, because it'll give you an idea of what will be coming for the next Oregon Energy Code. They're going to be covering items to cover what's new for the envelope. We know of a lot of the things that are already in there. Information on air leakage rates. We think there will be new thermal bridging criteria that may be in the final document. There will be looking at something called a total system performance path. Lighting, of course, once again, lots of updates to the lighting power density tables, some new recommended practices, information on horticultural lighting requirements, more guidance on energy cost budget. In other words, the modeling performance paths will be covered. And let's see here, the prescriptive requirements for on-site renewable energy in 90.1, and also looking at there's something new this time around. They are doing an energy credits for sort of additional measures like we have here for our residential and like Washington has. Thanks.
All righty.
Roger?
Yes.
That's it. Thanks, Roger.
Any questions for Mark regarding either the commercial adoption rule or ASHRAE training? Now's the time to ask those questions. Let's see here.
Yeah, I put the link to that training event in the chat for anybody who wants it. Anyone who wants to attend a training on a Sunday.
Bring on those questions about new horticultural lighting requirements, right? All right, well, I'm not hearing any questions, and I think it's time to move on at that point. Blake Shalite is here to talk to us about federal funding summary, the Infrastructure Act and Jobs Act, and the Inflation Reduction Act. Blake, are you ready?
Yeah. Thanks, Roger. You can go ahead and go to the next slide, I think. So if folks were present a few weeks ago, we gave a similar summary to the Resilient and Efficient Buildings Task Force on some of this funding that's coming down the line for the Inflation Reduction Act. We know there's a lot of federal funding coming down the line, and we kind of gave a quick overview about how some of this funding might apply to buildings in particular. So this is kind of a review of that same summary that we gave before, but I thought it would be topical to give to this group too. So this slide kind of presents just a quick overview of the funding buckets that are in the Inflation Reduction Act or IRA, and their timelines, and then how much funding is available under each one of those programs. And then we'll kind of go over each one of these. There's a slide for each one, so you can kind of get a good picture of the overview here and just the amount of funding that's coming. Not just Oregon's way, but every state's way, really. Yeah, go ahead, go to the next slide, Roger. So one of the first buckets of funding that applies in the residential sector is this HOMES program. There's always a good acronym associated with all these programs. So this is the Home Energy Performance Whole House Rebate Program, and there's kind of a couple different pathways under this program, but generally it's for existing buildings, and it is based on either a measured performance or a modeled performance from an energy efficiency measure or combination of measures that gets implemented. And depending on the amount of reduction, so it kind of starts for the model pathway, it starts at a 20% performance, and then up to the 34% threshold below 35. Homes are able to get up to $2,000 per home or $200,000 per multifamily building, up to 50% of project cost. And that amount doubles for low and moderate income folks. Then if you achieve the next tier of energy performance, 35% savings or greater under the model pathway, those incentive amounts, those grant amounts essentially double from the lower tier. So up to $4,000 per home or $8,000 for a low moderate income home. And then the second pathway is the measured pathway. And then that energy savings threshold is for anything that's 15% or greater. And that one can either be up to $2,000 for a 20, that's tied to a 20% reduction level for the energy use per average single family home or dwelling unit as applicable. And that's something that'll need to be determined through implementation of the program, up to 80% of project cost. And then that could double up to $4,000 for the LMI pathway. So next, then there's $4.3 billion of total funding for that program. Go back one slide real quick, Roger, because that amount's on there. So $4.3 billion of total funding nationwide under this program, and Oregon as a state will get over 50 million of that funding. They've kind of announced the specific funding amounts. I think it's around 56 or $57 million. Next slide. So this funding will be distributed through state energy offices, and every state energy office, Odo included, will have to submit an application with a plan to implement the homes rebate program. So it's not competitive funding; it's kind of formula based, but states do still have to submit a plan with a number of criteria for how we would implement that program. And then one other thing I'll just point out here is that there is a $200 rebate that's able to be provided to contractors that do work in a home located in a disadvantaged community. So next slide. Under that plan and under that states submit, states can increase the amount of rebates for LMI, up to that kind of maximum, I guess. And that state energy offices can also use up to 20% of the grant amount for planning, administration, or technical assistance to actually implement the savings. And then just because there are a number of funding streams, funding buckets underneath this, underneath the IRA, they do provide some provisions that there's no double dipping across the federal grants for the same upgrades. But that doesn't necessarily mean that a single project, and so it's for the same project across the grants. You could use the grants for two different projects, but it doesn't necessarily mean that a project couldn't utilize, for example, the Homes Grant and a tax credit, a federal tax credit for the same project, or Homes Grant and a local state or utility or other program incentive for the same project. It's just that federal grants can't be combined for the same project, and then obviously not combined through all the incentives over 100% of the project cost. Still some aspects of these to be determined, like definitions of disadvantaged communities. And I think we're all still kind of awaiting, in general, a lot of guidance from the US DOE and our other federal agency partners on a lot of these funding streams. So next slide. So the next program under the IRA is the High Efficiency Electric Homes Rebate Program. This one provides, in general, $4.2 billion to states, and then an additional $225 million to tribes. And similar to the last one, Oregon's gonna, it will be allotted about over $50 million of that $4.3 billion for state-specific use. And then what this one does is it provides, it provides incentives and grants for various, basically electric equipment and supportive projects to be implemented. And this one is income qualified, so depending on, it's got to be less than 150% of the area median income to qualify for this grant. And there are various rebate caps associated, $14,000 overall, and they kind of range, up to $8,000 for a qualifying heat pump, and the equipment has to meet certain performance criteria, for example, Energy Star levels on heat pumps. Next slide. Similar to homes, this one's distributed through energy offices, and energy offices need to submit a plan to the US DOE to be eligible to receive and utilize the funding. And again, there's that prevention of double dipping between the federal grant programs for the same project. Next slide, please. And then similar to the homes program too, states can use up to 20% of the grant for planning, administration, and technical assistance. And I guess you will notice that that definition of LMI household under the HERA program is a little bit different than under the homes program. It's at a threshold of 150% of the median income of the area, where the homes program was 80%. So next slide. Oh, this slide just gives a little bit more detail on what does an eligible entity mean for the purposes of the HERA program. Low or moderate income household, or an individual or entity that owns a multifamily building where not less than 50% of the residents are low and moderate income households, and then also government or commercial nonprofit entities that are carrying out projects on behalf of one of those previously described qualifying entities. And then it kind of lists various qualified electrification projects. It includes purchase and installation of equipment. It can be part of new construction to replace a non-electric appliance, that already exist, or for example, is a first-time purchase with respect to that particular appliance. Next slide, please. And then one other area of funding that's separate from the actual grants for project implementation is $200 million to train and educate contractors to do those projects that would meet a HOMES or HERA incentive. So, and states can use the funding to either reduce that cost of the training, to provide testing and certification, or to partner with nonprofits to develop and implement the state program. Next slide, Roger. So separate from like individual project incentives on the residential side, there's also this big bucket of funding, $1 billion in total, to provide assistance for the latest and zero building energy codes. 1/3 of that, 330 million, is to help states get to kind of the most recent model code level. So that's on the residential side, the 2021 IECC, and on the commercial side, ASHRAE 90.1 2019. Things like implementing plans to achieve full compliance with the codes, and active training, enforcement, compliance measurement could all qualify under this. For Oregon, since we're already at ASHRAE 90.1 2019, and certainly with the 2023 ORSC adoption at or beyond the 2021 IECC levels, this kind of first bucket of funding, in terms of just using that to get to the get to that level of performance, probably not so applicable, but certainly potential for training, enforcement, compliance, measurement that could be utilized there. But I think the second bucket of funding that's bigger, that's double that amount, 2/3 of this $1 billion, 670 million, is provided to help states get kind of beyond the base model codes as they exist right now, and start to incorporate the zero energy provisions of the 2021 IECC or some equivalent stretch code. And then, similar to that other first bucket of funding, you can use that money states can use that money for adopting codes, implementing compliance with the codes, training, enforcement, compliance, and things like that. So certainly a lot of codes related funding. I didn't really talk before about the IIJA funding, but there's a separate $225 million of codes funding in the IIJA bucket that Oregon's actually actively kind of pursuing a national, statewide, national training potential, code training, building official training project right now. So certainly a lot of funding coming down the way to assist with code adoption and training. Next slide. The only reason that I think to include this one is just that it doesn't have anything specific to do with buildings or codes or standards, but just it's the largest single bucket of funding, and it's mostly kind of undefined. But it was $27 billion, which is, like I said, the largest bucket of funding in the IRA. So still waiting on a lot of direction from the US EPA on implementation for this, but some potential applications for for states to utilize this for potentially for buildings and greenhouse gas reduction in that sector too. So next slide. So that kind of covers all of the grants that are under the IRA. Now I'll just give a brief overview of some of the tax credits and deductions under that legislation. First one is the 25C non-business energy property efficient home improvement credit. That just provides a tax credit for a number of different energy efficiency measures. So it really kind of expands and extends this credit as it exists, and extends it through the year 2032. So for qualifying equipment that meets these performance levels, these tax credits will be available for homeowners. Next slide. And then in addition to energy efficiency projects, the IRA also extends to 2034 the Section 25D credit, which allows taxpayers to claim a credit for qualified residential energy efficiency property purchases. There's a phase-out schedule listed in the bill itself, and now battery storage with a capacity of at least 3 kWh is eligible for this credit too. Next slide. So on the commercial side, though, 179D credit's been extended and expanded to. It drops that minimum efficiency improvement down to 25%, and lists a base deduction up to 50 cents per square foot, with potential increases for additional efficiency up to $1 per square foot, with a bonus deduction of $2.50 a square foot if prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements are met. Up to $5 a square foot on that one. And then it references ASHRAE 90.1 as its base kind of efficiency level, and the version that's in effect no later than 4 years prior to the placed in service date. Next slide. And then lastly, for the available tax credits is the 45L new energy efficient home credit that's been expanded and extended. And this provides contractors with tax credits for housing units built or remodeled to energy efficiency specifications, and then a bonus credit for multifamily units if the construction meets prevailing wage requirements. So just to kind of highlight some of the performance levels on the single family home side, there's the 2 tiers. The first one is a $2,500 tax credit for meeting the Energy Star single family new homes program, and then double that, a $5,000 tax credit for meeting the US DOE Zero Energy Ready Home program. That's in effect on January 1st of 2023. So I haven't been tracking super closely where that one is, but I know January 1st is coming up pretty dang close, and I'm not sure if the new version of the ZRH spec is out yet. Some folks on this call might have a better idea than I do. But, at the same time, while Oregon's adopting its ZRH equivalency code for the 2023 cycle, there's obviously some good synergies there where, a builder could, just by meeting the code is either at or pretty close to that tax credit, where it doesn't take a whole lot else to meet that specification to help support the new code. Next slide. Then just a couple quick bullet points on some of the other IRA provisions. There's tax credits for manufacturers, there's advanced industrial facilities deployment program, and then some additional funding for a variety of programs in rural areas that's included with the IRA. I think that rounds it out, Roger. Next slide. Is there anything else on that? Oh yeah, now we're on to the biannual energy report. So happy to, if there's any questions, we can take those now.
Any questions for
on
Blake?
the IRA stuff? Yeah,
There's one in the chat there, Blake, from Kevin.
Oh yeah, for the codes funding, does each state get an equal cut, or does that depend on need? Right now, a lot of that's actually still in flux. I think there's still some ambiguity whether or not that's a formula-based grant where they just assign, each state, that qualifies, that has to, submit a plan for how they're going to use the funding. If it's just like based on that formula amount that each state gets, or if it'll be more competitive. And from what I understand, that still hasn't really been determined yet. I know there's some organizations, I think like I recently heard that NASIO, which is kind of represents a lot of state energy offices, was providing some just support for it being formula based, but that hasn't been really decided yet.
All right, any more questions?
Yeah, I just had a question around the state's plan to implement these funds. How can we follow that or be involved as the funding comes in?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It will certainly be part of a public process for us to develop our plan. I would anticipate, I'm not exactly sure what that forum would look like, but it could certainly be something that we could bring to this group or a separate group. But we would fully, expect and want to receive public input on how to implement those programs.
Great, thank you.
There's always information available on Oto's front page of the website as well. You'll see a link right there in the front talking about the federal funding.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that we've just really identified as a need for our agency and a lot of other agencies is just general coordination on a lot of these funding programs from a federal level, utility level, across the state. Like Oregon Housing and Community Services has energy efficiency weatherization funding that could potentially overlap with some of this funding. And our end goal is to make it as as streamlined and as understandable as possible for the consumer, right? Like that if somebody has a project that they need to know which potential incentives it might qualify for, that to make it at least the least confusing that it could be if somebody's trying to utilize these available funding sources. And ideally it's like, okay, you'll make one application and the other state, of all this available state funding is kind of there, and somebody can identify whether or not they qualify for the different funding sources in kind of one location. But that's something that we're really exploring and trying to hopefully optimize when it all gets implemented.
Great, thanks, Blake.
Yeah.
We can follow up with other questions too after the next couple of slides. But for the moment, I'd like to talk to you about the biennial energy report that Oregon Department of Energy puts together every 2 years. And this one is the 2022 BRR, affectionately known. And as you can see on the page here, it has an introduction, and I give you a link there if you'd like to go see. There's a huge amount of information involved in the BRR. It's a report that's based on analysis of data and information collected and compiled by ODO, and provides data and information on key energy resources, policies, trends, forecasts, and what that means to Oregon. The 2022 report is divided into several sections, as you can see here: energy by the numbers, timeline of energy history in Oregon, resource technology reviews, and energy 101. The first one there, the energy by the numbers, is detailed information on how energy flows through Oregon. The second one, the timeline of energy history in Oregon, I got to tell you, this is an amazing flow chart. That it's a timeline, and it's just got a ton of information from before the 1800s, actually, to the present day. One of our communications people was nice enough to put this together, and you should just go take a look. It's amazing. The resource and technology review page, that section covers the spectrum of traditional and innovative energy resources and technologies, from the basics about electricity generation to energy efficient buildings, technology, and transportation fuels. And then the last section here noted is the Energy 101. That section aims to help readers understand the basics about how energy systems are planned and managed, along with innovative actions within communities and sectors. A lot of good information there as well. But then the very final section is something we added on this year, and that's the policy briefs. And I noted a link on here as well that might be more relevant to this discussion here. And that is a discussion about what can be done in existing buildings. So a lot of good information there in the 2022 BRR. And I just want to call your attention to it and provide those links to you to go take a look. And thank you so much to all the people in this audience that have helped us with compiling that report. So the next slide we want to move to is Blake talking about the Joint Task Force on Resilient, Efficient Buildings.
Thanks, Roger.
Yeah,
not a lot of huge updates to give here, but for folks that have been kind of tracking this work, just wanted to highlight that the final meeting of this task force is actually happening right after this meeting. And you're certainly encourage anybody who's interested to tune into that. But this task force has done a lot of great discussion and analysis over the course of the last 4 months, I think. So they've got a lot of material and reports and analysis that's out there for review. But their final meeting is happening at 3 o'clock today, where they're kind of going to review their final report and findings. So
good to call that out, Blake.
Yep.
Any questions for either of those two topics, the BRR or the Joint Task Force? Not seeing any. All right, so I guess we can move, Mark, to the next section, teeing you up for, let's see. There we go, results of the 2023 ORSC Code Committee.
Yes, thanks, Roger. Again, Mark Heiser with Building Codes Division gives sort of an update on what has been happening with the Code Adoption Committee. A majority of the work on Chapter 11 has been done. There will be a little last cleanup relative to the the last item on the page, the ERI path at the last committee meeting. The committee decisions are done. Of course, this is just the very beginning. There's again review by the Residential and Manufacturer Structures Board. They will do another review of all the items that are coming out of the Code Committee and be forwarding them to making their vote and recommendations for final sending on to the division for adoption for the 2023 residential code. Bit of language cleanup, some things that were worked on. One note is and I think this is covered again on another slide, that if people were really trying to move toward getting ducts inside, since such a big impact, and if people wish to remain, have things with deeply buried ducts, they do have to do an extra additional measure. So not just one, but two of them. Future code may have more ways to look at the code, and on additional measures. As we noted, there was an approval to get rid of the old, really sort of an energy modeling path for residential buildings, which very few people have ever done, and moving on to something that aligns with the International Energy Conservation Code residential version, which is the ERI path, which is essentially a codified version of getting a HERS rating. So that was approved for forwarding by the committee. We'll go to the next slide. So the items were presented to the Code Committee on October 27th and November 3rd. It started with the division's draft Chapter 11, intending to achieve the goal of meeting EO 17-20 to get equivalent of the, I think it's version 0.06 of the ZERH program. So equivalent performance, not exactly adopting it, but getting the equivalent energy performance. Proponents of energy proposals came in looking to do continued improvements, do different paths, or to go beyond the base 1720 requirement. Code recommendations are moving forward again to the RMSB, which is the Residential and Manufactured Structures Board. One quick note, when we put this out, it looked like January 11th was going to be the RMSB meeting. That is going to be put off. Residential code has a lot with some other issues kind of slowed down the adoption process and the review by the committee relative to structure, snow loads, and the like. So the committee is going to take a little longer, and we're expecting the RMSB probably to be rescheduled for sometime in February. Again, yes, we put the schedule together when we thought they'd get through the review a little faster. Solar Ready is moving to section R324. There may be continuing work on that as time goes on. I'm trying to remember the final results on that. Had to be in another meeting, but I believe they got through most of the Solar Ready section and did some modifications to that, and really trying to move all of the solar provisions, the construction provisions that are in the structural code, as well as what was in Chapter 11, into one location so that it can all be found in one place. Next slide, Roger. Again, some of the highlights. The additional measure 7 was deleted. Had a not a very positive impact on the 2021 code and is being removed for the 2023. Again, as earlier noted earlier, we're looking to get the ducts inside, moving more towards having it be a integral part of the code. The FAU fan unit, air handler unit, does need to come inside now. No exceptions for that. Language was cleaned up. The option to do the deeply buried ducts, which is allowed under the federal USDOE ZERH Zero Energy Ready Home program, is still there, but it does require you to select a second additional measure. Air sealing stringency was increased. The blower door testing option versus that was in the last code has been that if you are going to do a blower door test, it needs to get down to 3.25 air changes per hour. Additional measure 8, if you're going to take that as one of your additional measures, the air sealing needs to drop from 3.25 to, in the 2023 code, you'll need to meet a 2.75 air changes per hour. Of Energy Trust homes over the last 5 years, they've been averaging about 3.09. So you need to, be better than a program, on the better side of program homes. One other piece is that a smart thermostat is required with some minor exceptions. It does not require a connection to the internet. And of course, yes, exceptions for smaller systems that aren't able to communicate or with the new smarter thermostats that can sort of work into future demand limiting and be able to sense when you're not home to help set systems back. Any questions from the group?
One more slide here too, Mark.
All right. We'll go to the next one then while we're waiting. And again, as noted earlier, the code committee did accept, there were 2 proposals to look at using the ERI compliance path that's found in the IECC and moving that forward. The alternative system analysis, which was really trying to do a full-scale energy model, they decided that was just too difficult to keep up with and have deleted that. The ERI targets will be put forward based on the current modeling. The code committee did set sort of a floor or minimum that would be recommended to the board, and that will be discussed probably at the last of the meeting. So once we've got a little bit more analysis done, there was a proposal that was put in and accepted about fan integrated supply systems for the whole house ventilation. The proponent has sent a few things in where they may or may not come in to ask for a little bit more or maybe clarifying the language a little more for the final board meeting. The ducts inside language was cleaned up and some other options were added in to try and get you 2 ducts inside and cleaning up what is language about where it was located, whether it was in a condition crawl space, other locations. That was intended to clarify a lot of questions that we get. We will and clarify what is in. We have some code technical bulletin guides for ducts inside and whole house ventilation to align with those. There wasn't a home size proposal received at this time. On this cycle, we're hoping that something can be worked out for the next code cycle, because there is a desire to get something for more affordable but efficient for the people in the low and middle income housing market. We do now have a very good database of home size, and we can look at sort of what is an appropriate additional data, look at home size and what might be appropriate for the state of Oregon for looking at affordability. We're continuing to be on track to meet the target set in Executive Order 2004, which is that 60% reduction of regulated loads relative to the energy code we had really in 2006, the 2005 residential code. As noted here, yes, collaboration is going to be a key to a balanced, effective energy code for the 2026 and 2029 ORSC. Looking at, will that bring in home size? Will we need to be looking at a point system, something similar to, more relative to what may be happening in Washington, or a point system that's now coming into the IECC, looking at a method that's really set for the state. And also just one last note about things that may or may not have made it through the code committee. During the committee and at the board, we'll be asking them for, are there things that they wish that may have been considered but weren't adopted that might be forwarded for consideration under the REACH code that will be a complement to the 2023 Residential Code Chapter 11. Any questions?
That was a lot of information, Mark and Blake.
Yeah.
Any questions on all of that? That was a ton to go through. I don't see any coming in through the chat. So the final slide that we have is basically just the wrap-up slide. I want to call your attention to the next meeting date, and that's March 14th. If you have any suggested topic areas, anything like that, would you please forward those on to us? You have at least my email address here, and you can always find Mark and Blake and Kelly. We can help you out with any questions you might have. So one last call for questions or comments. I know we're early.
Roger, I do have a question. Is there any information on the Odo site about healthy homes, maintaining the efficiency of the home, maintaining the air quality in the home, those kind of things?
On the Odo website, did you say, Lisa? I'm sorry.
Yeah, on the Odo website.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. Blake, do you know if there's anything on the Odo website?
Not that I'm aware of, Roger.
Yeah. Lisa, could you give us a little description of that, maybe in an email, and Blake and I can follow up and maybe put something out there? I think it's a good idea.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, just a brief description of what you're indicating there so we can capture it.
All right, will do.
Lisa, you always have good suggestions.
Well, I think as the homes get tighter and tighter and,
Right.
if you have failures within that new home, people might not even think about it. And
Correct.
then they have an unhealthy environment.
All right. Any other questions or comments? I guess that's it for today. I hope you all have an enjoyable afternoon and happy holidays to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Great job hosting. Thanks.
Thanks,
Thanks.
Roger. Thanks, Blake.
Bye.
Thanks.
And I did put a question in the chat if you go.
Yeah, Daryl Fuller's got a note in there.
Okay.
I'm just looking for the link once it's available. There's somebody I'd like to have listen to the conversation.
Oh, to the recorded conversation?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, on the last slide there, meeting materials, it was described there. Daryl, I can just send you that link.
Sorry, you're cutting in and out on me, but
I'll send you the link, Daryl.
okay, to this meeting, that would be great.
Yes.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Thank you.
See you, Roger.